She laughed when I lost everything, my company, my home, even my name in the papers. She said I was a good lesson for our daughter on what failure looks like. But I stayed quiet. Until one day, she lost the only thing that ever really mattered to her. And it wasn't money, status, or reputation. It all started the night I watched her clink champagne glasses with her lover from the parking lot I used to own. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about justice, and how sometimes justice waits for the perfect silence. I used to be the kind of man people returned calls to immediately. My name on an email meant things moved, investors listened, clients paid on time. That was before the collapse, before everything I built turned to ash in a matter of weeks. It wasn't a dramatic Wall Street scandal or some Ponzi scheme. No, mine was slower. A shift in the market, a competitor with deeper pockets, a few too many leveraged bets, and the walls began to tremble. I worked 18-hour days trying to plug the holes, to negotiate new terms, to hold the damn thing together with blood and caffeine. Rachel, my wife, never understood what that pressure felt like. At first, she pretended. She'd bring me late-night coffee, rub my shoulders, tell me I was her hero. But once the media turned on me, once headlines said I was reckless and irresponsible, she stopped pretending. The shoulder rubs vanished. So did the late-night talks. The night the bank seized our home, she didn't cry. She opened a bottle of wine, sat in the kitchen wearing silk, and said, "Maybe this is what you needed to realize you're not invincible." I stood there holding the letter from the bank. She raised her glass. "To humility," she said. That was the moment something in me began to shift. Not because of the house, not because of the business, but because of that laugh, soft, smug, and venom-laced. It echoed louder than any courtroom gavel I'd ever hear. Rachel adapted quickly. Too quickly. Within a month of losing the house, she was brunching at rooftop cafes again, dressed like the recession never touched her. A mutual friend once said, "Rachel always lands on her feet." I didn't realize she meant Rachel had already found someone to catch her mid-air. I was sleeping on my brother's couch, trying to build something, anything, that resembled a life again. Meanwhile, Rachel was posting vacation photos from Aruba with captions like, "Healing is sunshine and honesty." The man beside her, always half-cropped, wore designer watches I recognized from trade magazines I used to be featured in. Our daughter, Lily, stayed with her during the week. I got weekends. 48 hours of trying to undo the glamour, of reminding a 10-year-old that reality isn't always yachts and resorts. Lily didn't say much at first, but she noticed. The way she looked at me, confused, hesitant, cut deeper than any bankruptcy letter. One Sunday, Lily asked me, "Daddy, why doesn't Mommy ever talk about before?" I blinked. Before what? Before everything broke. I didn't have an answer. But that night, I realized Rachel hadn't just moved on. She was rewriting the narrative. And if I didn't do something soon, my own daughter would grow up believing her father was just a cautionary tale. That's when I started watching, listening, collecting. Patterns always reveal the truth. You just have to watch long enough. I started mapping Rachel's social posts, comparing dates and locations. At first, it was curiosity. But then, things didn't add up. She said she was at a wellness retreat, yet her tagged location was a luxury casino in Atlantic City. She posted a sunset from Paris, but the skyline showed New York. It wasn't just the lies. It was the confidence, the brazenness. She was rebuilding her world on illusion, and she thought no one would notice. I kept screenshots, email confirmations forwarded by mistake, even notes Lily brought back from school. Rachel's lover, his name eventually slipped out. Mitchell Cross, a former investor I had fired 2 years ago for insider leaks. Now he was whining and dining my wife in the same circles that once praised me. But I didn't confront them. Not yet. I went to see a lawyer instead. Not to sue, not to fight over custody or assets. I wanted to know what the law could do with lies. The lawyer, an older woman named Frances, listened to everything. At the end, she looked at me and said, "You don't want a battle. You want a clean kill, with evidence." That's when I realized what I needed wasn't revenge. It was strategy. And Rachel? She was handing me all the ammunition I'd ever need. Lily started asking more questions. One afternoon, while we were walking through the park eating ice cream, she stopped mid-step and said, "Mitchell bought Mommy a ring. I saw it in her drawer. It was hidden under a sock, but I saw." I froze. Not because of the ring, but because Rachel hadn't worn her wedding band since the house was taken. That same night, I opened the safe at my brother's apartment where I kept old backups of company files. Among the clutter, I found something I'd nearly forgotten. A signed affidavit Mitchell had submitted when he joined our firm. It included a confidentiality clause and outlined the proprietary strategies he'd later leaked. It wasn't much, but it was a thread. And in court, sometimes a single thread could unravel an entire image. I went back to Frances. "This could be a civil breach," she said, flipping through the papers. "But combined with your wife's known relationship to him, and if you can prove financial benefit..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The next steps were clear. I needed access. Digital trails, bank transfers, anything that showed Rachel profited off my downfall. And I needed to do it without alerting her. Because this wasn't just a case now, it was a setup. I hired a digital forensic specialist, not some guy in a hoodie, but a former cybersecurity consultant named Eric, now freelancing after years in corporate compliance. Discreet, expensive, worth it. We started with Rachel's public activity, her posts, her check-ins, the travel logs. Then Eric dug deeper. A shared cloud folder accidentally left, synced to an old email. Expense reports, itineraries. One in particular stood out. A payment from Mitchell's consultancy firm to Rachel for strategic communications, dated 2 weeks after my company filed for bankruptcy. The amount? $50,000. She hadn't earned a dime on her own in years. Now suddenly she was consulting. It was laughable if it weren't so calculated. Eric found more. Photos never posted, but saved. One of them showed Mitchell and Rachel together at a gala, her hand on his chest, the date matching the night she told me she was at a support group for spouses of entrepreneurs. The deeper we went, the clearer the trail became. This wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated repositioning, social, financial, reputational. And now I had a map. Frances reviewed the findings and nodded slowly. "This is no longer a divorce case," she said. "This is fraud, collusion, and potentially criminal conspiracy if we push hard enough." The scales weren't tipping. They were about to snap. Rachel didn't see it coming. That was the key. I let her believe I was still licking my wounds, too busy with self-reflection and rebuilding to pose any threat. I played the defeated ex, the cooperative co-parent. I even smiled through her veiled insults during custody exchanges. Behind that mask, we built a case. Eric traced 2 more transfers, both routed through shell accounts tied to Mitchell's firm. Francis compiled everything into a timeline. My collapse, their affair, the funds, the false consulting contracts. But it wasn't enough to just accuse them. We needed to catch them lying. So we baited a deposition. Francis filed a motion for a formal review of child custody, citing concerns about lifestyle instability. It forced Rachel into a sworn affidavit where she claimed full financial independence and denied any cohabitation or shared business interest with Mitchell. That was the crack. Because the paper trail we had told a different story. The hearing date was set. I stood outside the courthouse that morning, watching as Rachel stepped out of a black SUV in designer heels, sunglasses perched like a crown. She still thought it was a family matter. She had no idea the courtroom had been prepped for something else entirely. The courtroom was modest. No jury, just a judge, our attorneys, and a handful of observers. Rachel entered smiling, waving slightly to the bailiff like they were old friends. She wore a cream-colored blouse, subtle jewelry, and that expression she reserved for performances, soft concern, masking quiet superiority. Francis opened calmly. Your Honor, we request to admit newly discovered financial records relevant to the custody arrangement. Rachel's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed it. The moment Rachel saw the folder, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. First, the invoices, then the travel logs, then the digital correspondence between her and Mitchell, all connected to shell companies and falsified service descriptions. Rachel leaned forward, squinting. Then Francis dropped the final piece. A photo of Rachel and Mitchell boarding a private jet, time-stamped during a period when Rachel claimed to be in therapy retreats and unavailable for Lily. The courtroom fell silent. Mrs. Morgan, the judge said, did you knowingly misrepresent your financial ties and living arrangements? Rachel hesitated. No, Your Honor. Those documents are taken out of context. Francis stood. Then we respectfully request a forensic audit and a formal investigation into potential perjury and financial fraud. That was when Rachel's smile finally cracked. And that crack? It was just the beginning of her unraveling. Mitchell was subpoenaed next. He arrived wearing a tailored suit and arrogance thicker than his cologne. His lawyer tried to delay the deposition, but Francis was ready. She presented the judge with communication logs. Mitchell's email exchanges with Rachel, one of which confirmed payment for strategic reputation management. That phrase stuck. The judge asked Mitchell directly, were these payments for services rendered or part of a concealed income stream shared with Mrs. Morgan? Mitchell shifted in his seat. They were legitimate consulting fees. Francis slid another document across the table, then explained why the same phrase appears in 3 invoices tied to separate shell companies, none of which have legitimate tax filings. Mitchell's face flushed. His lawyer leaned in to whisper, but the judge cut them off. Mr. Cross, you are under oath. Mitchell hesitated, then said, I'd like to invoke my Fifth Amendment rights at this time. That silence spoke louder than anything. Rachel stared at him, wide-eyed, realizing for the first time that Mitchell was protecting himself, not her. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. What began as a custody hearing was now unfolding like a white-collar criminal case. And the best part? We weren't even at the climax yet. Rachel's defense pivoted hard. Suddenly, she was the victim. The filings painted her as a manipulated woman caught in the web of a deceptive businessman, Mitchell. Her lawyer emphasized emotional vulnerability, coercion, and even suggested Rachel had been unaware of the financial intricacies. Francis didn't interrupt. She let it all land like a boxer leaning into weak punches before the counterstrike. When it was our turn, Francis introduced a new witness, Emily, our former nanny. Rachel's face drained of color. Emily testified to overhearing conversations between Rachel and Mitchell, discussions about when to drop me, what assets Rachel could secure in her name, even mentions of offshore accounts. Then came the real blow. A voice recording. Rachel's voice laughing, saying, "Once he's out of the picture, Mitchell and I can rebuild everything without the dead weight." The judge paused the session. I could feel the tremor ripple through Rachel as she sat frozen, fingers clenched into her skirt. No amount of designer clothing could cover that kind of exposure. Outside the courthouse, the press began to stir. Rumors of fraud, betrayal, and hidden money were catnip for the tabloids. And still, I hadn't revealed the one thing that would destroy her completely. The letter. It had sat unopened in a fireproof box for years. Something my father gave me when Lily was born. He had written it for Rachel, a personal message in case something ever happened to him. My father, a retired judge, had seen enough courtroom betrayals to know how fragile legacies could be. Rachel never read it. She tossed it aside, saying she didn't need old man wisdom. But Lily found it. She was cleaning out a box in her room and stumbled across it. She brought it to me, curious. We read it together. My father's careful words about integrity, trust, and the responsibility of shaping a child's moral compass. At the bottom, he'd written something chilling. "If you ever find yourself tempted to rewrite the truth, remember, children don't forget who lies first, and neither do judges." That line, it was prophetic. Frances submitted the letter as character evidence. The judge allowed it, not for legal weight, but for perspective. Rachel watched it being read aloud in court, her eyes glassy. Not because she was moved, but because she realized Lily had brought it in. That was the moment the facade shattered. Not because of me, not even because of the evidence, but because her daughter no longer believed her. The next hearing was different. Rachel arrived alone. No SUV, no sunglasses. Just a beige coat too big for her frame and a silence I hadn't seen before. Mitchell had disappeared. According to his attorney, he'd flown to Singapore for business obligations and would be unavailable indefinitely. Frances smiled at the news. We moved forward with our motion to amend custody arrangements based on Rachel's demonstrated pattern of deceit, endangerment of financial stability, and emotional manipulation. The judge listened, carefully, then asked Rachel if she wanted to respond. She stood, hands shaking slightly. "I made mistakes," she said, "but I love my daughter." Frances replied without a hint of cruelty. "Love isn't the issue. Integrity is." The judge took a recess. Outside, Rachel approached me for the first time in months. "You planned this," she whispered. "No," I said. "You scripted it. I just read it back to you, with footnotes." She looked like she wanted to cry, or scream, maybe both. Instead, she turned and walked away, slower than I'd ever seen her move. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, just gravity. Because the next decision wouldn't be about punishment. It would be about legacy. The final hearing felt like a formality, but it was everything. Frances laid out the full picture one last time. A calculated betrayal, an orchestrated financial scheme, and a disregard for the stability of the child involved. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The facts spoke loud enough. Rachel's lawyer, now visibly defeated, attempted to request shared custody with monitored oversight. But the judge was unmoved. "I've reviewed all documentation, testimonies, and evidence. This isn't a question of parental capability. It's a question of character." Rachel didn't look up. The gavel came down. Full custody awarded to me. Limited visitation for Rachel. Contingent on psychological evaluation and future conduct. I looked over at Lily, seated in the back with my sister. She didn't smile, but she gave a small nod. The kind only a child who's seen too much knows how to give. Outside, reporters shouted questions. I said nothing. Rachel walked past them, head down, shielded by a folder. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. Because in the end, she took my house, my name, even my child, for a while. But she couldn't take the one thing I never gave away. The truth. Some people think justice is loud. A verdict, a sentence, a moment broadcast for the world to see. But sometimes, justice is quiet. It's a child choosing to sit closer to you than to the person who betrayed her. It's a room where truth echoes louder than any apology. It's a name cleared, not shouted, but understood. Rachel lost more than custody. She lost the illusion of her own story. And I didn't win out of vengeance. I won because I refused to let her rewrite the narrative. If this story struck something in you, if you've ever been silenced or gaslit or told you were imagining things, leave a comment. Share your story. Or just say, I'm still here. Because someone needs to hear it. And someone else needs to know. They're not alone.